Now, we've told you about Centralia, that Pennsylvania town that had to be abandoned after a fire at a trash dump, made its way into a coal seam where it burns to this day. Now, Centralia isn't the only place with hellfire burning under the ground. Not only that, the one we're going to tell you about today was set intentionally. Hello, folks. I'm Steve Gilly, along with Rod Mullins, and this is Stories, a History of Appalachia. Now, before we get started, I'd like to ask you to go down below and click that subscribe button. And while you're at it, ding that little bell so you get notice of every new story that we put out. We'd also love it if you'd share us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, or wherever you happen to hang out online.
Well, Steve, another interesting story about a fire down below. And this one I didn't even know about. I knew about Centralia. That's probably the most famous, if you want to call it famous, of the underground fires. But this one's a little bit different.
Well, it is, and it's got quite a bit of history for Appalachia involved in this, beyond there being a fire under the ground.
Wow.
Yeah, so let's get to it, shall we?
Okay.
It is time to head north for a story, across the mighty Ohio River into the state of Ohio. Now, after the Civil War, industrialists began rushing into Appalachia looking to exploit the natural resources found there, coal in particular. Now, this mineral grab first began in the northern part of Appalachia, then spread south into West Virginia, Virginia, and Kentucky. Along with all the new coal mines came new coal miners. And not long after that came demands for better working conditions and more money for those miners. That's key to this story. The town of New Straitsville was established in southeastern Ohio, about 50 miles outside of Columbus in 1870 by the New Straitsville Mining Company as a company town. However, this wasn't your typical company town. It was, and still is, a real small town, like most other small American towns, with schools, churches, and businesses other than the New Straitsville Mining Company. Now, over the decade after its founding, New Straitsville experienced tremendous growth, reaching a population of over 4,000 by 1880. Most of the town's men worked in the coal mines owned by the New Straitsville Mining Company.
Well, in 1883, several coal and iron companies in the area, known as Hocking Valley, merged to become the Columbus and Hocking Coal and Iron Company. This new company promptly cut wages for the miners by 1/4. By the following spring, the company further reduced wages by 20 cents per ton of coal mined. The miners rejected the pay cut, but the company cut anyway, precipitating the Great Hocking Valley coal strike of 1884 to 1885. Now, this strike was led by miners who belonged to several different and often competing mine unions who had come to the area to organize those men while they worked in the mines. As would happen again and again and again in the coal mines everywhere in Appalachia, the company simply hired scab workers, particularly Pinkerton Detective Agency, men as mine guards to continue mining coal while ignoring the union miners' demands.
The strike soon grew violent, with railroad bridges destroyed and mines attacked. Strikers even set 7 mines on fire to shut them down. Then the unthinkable happened. A group of frustrated strikers in New Straitsville, seeing very little progress with the mine company, decided to shut down a mine themselves to stop those scab miners from making the money they should have been making. It was time for a little sabotage.
Sabotage or sabotage? How do you want to say it, Steve?
Either way, it was bad, Ron.
Either way, it was terrible. In the fall of 1884, these men went to a mine on Plummer Hill where they took some coal cars, filled them with wood, then soaked that wood with oil, and then lit them on fire and rolled them to the mine entrance. I think you can probably guess where things went from there. Those flaming coal cars managed to ignite the loose coal, I guess the coal dust as well, lying at the bottom of that mine. But unlike those other mines, the fire in the Plummer Hill mine wasn't going to stop there. That loose coal ignited the coal seam itself, which began to burn fiercely. And folks, when I say, coal seam, I'm not talking about some little piddly 3 or 4 foot wide seam of coal. Okay. Now, some people might in this part of Appalachia, at least where I'm from, consider 3 to 4 feet of coal kind of small stuff. But this particular seam, folks, was 14 feet tall. Now, that's rare, but almost tall enough for a giraffe to stand upright.
Whoa.
As far as the depth of that seam of coal, it was anybody's guess, but most folks figured that it was at least several miles into the earth.
Wow. Now, some stories say that it was several days before the fire was discovered, and by that time it was far too late to put it out with any means available in 1884. So the
Mm.
fire just burned and burned and burned some more. In fact, it's still burning to this day, nearly 140 years later.
Wow.
And as the fire burned the coal to ash and cinders, the ground above began to collapse and flames shot out of the ground as if hell itself had opened up, ready to swallow the unworthy sinners of the earth. It's said, Rod, that in the 1890s, people could draw water from their wells that was so hot they could brew coffee and tea with it, and often they did. And as late as 2003, smoke began to issue from the ground beneath the Wayne National Forest, indicating that the fire had reached that spot. Now, you might be thinking, New Straitsville must have been abandoned a long time ago, right? Leaving a ruined ghost town. Well, Rod, you'd be wrong.
Well, I didn't think I was wrong in the first place because, it lies with determination in the group of people.
Mhm.
Because you see, the folks at New Straitsville are a hardy lot, and they were determined to stay put in the town they had proudly been a part of building. With the permanent closing of the mines, there was mass unemployment, with houses and shops lost to the fire. Still, the people of New Straitsville remained. By the 1930s, Ripley's Believe It or Not came to town to do a radio broadcast about the mine fire, which brought curious tourists and their money to New Straitsville.
Oh, another thing, Rod. It
Hmm,
seems that all that smoke that was rising out of the ground all those years was actually good for something else.
really?
Yeah, you see, the smoke served as a bit of camouflage for all the
Ah,
stills that were operating in the area, making moonshine. And not just any moonshine, because the shine from New Straitsville soon got a reputation as the quote unquote champagne of illegal whiskey, likely
mhm.
because of the taste of the water used to distill it.
Right.
Pretty soon it was referred to as the Straitsville Special, and none other than Al Capone himself is said to have gotten involved in distributing it nationwide. New Straitsville became the self styled moonshine capital of the world. And there is a moonshine festival there every September with displays of antique stills. And one other note, right, Rod?
Right. There is a place near New Straitsville called Robinson's Cave. Now, this cave is a natural amphitheater with great acoustics in it. It also was a great place to hold mass meetings such as union organizing rallies away from prying eyes. Because in the 1880s, two union factions gathered at Robinson's Cave for the first organizational meeting of a new united union, the National Federation of Miners and Mine Laborers. Now, this organization later changed its name to the National Progressive Union. And in January of 1890, this union formed the Knights of Labor Trade Assembly number 135 to form the United Mine Workers of America. And Steve, here's another thing. You
Mm-hmm.
mentioned Al Capone back there.
Yes.
What wasn't Al Capone involved in on back during the time of prohibition, and especially during that very uh hell-raising time in our country's history?
Well, to be honest with you, I don't know that he was all that involved, but it's all the stories you hear say it's said that Al Capone did this, or it's said that Al Capone did that. Apparently, he ran Johnson City, Tennessee. He was up in New
Right.
Straitsville. He was, I think, up in West Virginia at some little town. I mean, yeah, he had his fingers in everything if you listen to what the stories were.
Well, I know that he also had some connections in Cincinnati,
Mm-hmm.
and that was a drop-off point for a lot of moonshine and illegal whiskey that came out of Southwest Virginia and Eastern Kentucky that was flown in by airplane. That's something for another podcast later on. But still, he was involved in a lot of things, and you mentioned it. Johnson City, Tennessee. There were times that when he went on the run, he came to Johnson City, hid out there for a little while until they started getting close, and then he fled and went somewhere else. But Al Capone was involved in a lot of things, maybe not directly, but through some of his, how can I say it, cronies per se, and the way that all this stuff was set up. And I'm sure that if you watched old reruns of The Untouchables with Robert Stack, I'd probably fill you in on what you need to know.
Well, as I mentioned, it's said that he did
Yes.
all this stuff in Johnson City and everywhere else. Yeah, we'll just kind of have to look into that.
Yeah, that'll have to be something we'll look at later.
And folks, that's the story of the new Straitsville coal mine fire, still burning nearly 140 years after it was lit. Another bit of the history of this place we call home, Appalachia. Thanks for listening. Now, you can subscribe to the audio version of the podcast at Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Amazon Music, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Audible, and many, many more. Till next we meet. So long, everybody.
So long.